Fellas, I just did amazing on this calculus midterm, alright? It's gonna go great, it's gonna go great. Alright, your first question, you asked what the .NET framework is. So, if you, the .NET framework, it's kind of a lot of things, right? It compiles your programs to what we'd call, it's not binary yet. It's like intermediate binary that runs on the C# virtual machine. Now, that's a lot of words. Basically, it writes its own assembly that would usually be written as ones and zeros to your computer in its own intermediate. So then it runs on its own program. So like, what's a great way of saying this? So like if you had C, it compiles directly to ones and zeros. Something like that. While C# compiles to its custom ones and zeros that it only knows, and then it runs on its virtual machine, which runs on your computer, and then compiles it to normal ones and zeros. Basically, that's the gist of it. That's the whole point of it. So, it's kind of cool, kind of wicked. Allows a lot of cross-platform tomfoolery. But yeah, that's the gist of that. Now, if you were wondering, your second question is how to set it up. First, you're gonna need it. You're actually gonna need to download .NET with the .NET framework, either or. They have their benefits, so you're gonna want the SDK, the source development kit, of course, and download it depending on whatever. I'm on Linux, so I actually already have it installed, so I'm not gonna reinstall it. The .NET and .NET framework are both two different things. But really, I suggest just getting .NET, the newest version of .NET 8, unless, for my later point, you're going to want it for some library, which I'll mention in a little while. At the moment, I'm trying to make a game, what I've learned so far. The problem with, I really don't want to use a terminal in VS Code. Yep, that's most things, I think. So you have a couple options. One, you could get Real Visual Studio, which comes with a form thing, which, you know, cringe. We don't want all that bloatware, right? You could stick with the good old trusty, good old pal VS Code here. I suggest you look into libraries. Libraries that there's tons of libraries, right? You can. I personally use Raylib, but I wouldn't suggest it for C# because you have to get into like C bindings and stuff. But there's some pretty good ones. Like I just did some snooping around and found MonoGame, which this will creating a new project. It goes through pretty much everything, including Visual Studio Code, and this basically adds a framework like a game engine. So you see, you'll code the game and then you'll work through it. It's a pretty good tutorial. Setting up, it even walks you through like setting it up in VS Code. So like, this is using Visual Studio here. Let me see, alternative. So this works with the .NET 6 SDK. So if you were getting .NET 6, I suggest you just, you know, install .NET 6 from your required source, and then you'd run this in the command line terminal, and then you'd create a new project, and you just, you know, go through the steps. I believe in you. I believe you could do it. I don't think I'm going to be doing that today, unless you want me to, of course. I could make a tutorial on how to do this if you really wanted to. Or you could go, like, you know, absolute bare metal, and get SFML, which is basically just a graphics. So this adds, like, collision. It does a bunch of stuff for you. So you could, for example, do what you did in VS Code, where you had a terminal with a bunch of squares or whatever. You could do it however you want, but you could say, transform whatever you had in VS Code, where it was a bunch of characters with arrays, and just replace it with images. Right? That's what SFML does. It just allows you to draw images to the screen and move them, and gives you this graphical interface, while this MonoGame gives you a bunch of tools for making a game from C#. And you basically just add these libraries to your C# instance and be able to start working. And it does all the heavy lifting for you, right? So all you have to worry about is, hey, type the funny code, read documentation, you know, then you're done. It's cooked. And then you say, here you're saying the code part of comes pretty easily. I'm using VS Code, but there are many complications. I'm wondering what the complications are. Also, have you installed the C# extensions? Very good. Very, very important. Also, getting IntelliSense isn't a terrible idea. I don't know. Yeah, IntelliCode, very good. Does auto-completion, all that good jazz. Your second question was, you don't understand the using statement. So, okay, that's pretty simple. So imagine you have namespaces, right? In C# you have namespaces. So you'd have namespace, something, then you'd have, let me make sure, you'd have your class in here. So like, you'd have your class gym or something. So a namespace basically encapsulates all of this. So when you're using system, when you're using something, it is importing that namespace. So system, instead of having to do like, you know, system dot whatever over and over and over and over again, you could just say using system and then do like my class something in the system and then equals new class or whatever, right? Or, you know, I'm sure you've seen something like, so you could do, the same thing works. So you could do system dot my class, which is something like this. So, you know, I could make a namespace called, let's see here, namespace J, and then if I had a class in here called wow, I could go j.wow and then call whatever that function was, right? So it's basically just a way of encapsulating data. That's really useful. So I could say using J, and then I could just say wow. And that, I think that's how that works. 90% sure. Could be wrong, could be mixing Java, but I'm pretty sure that's how that works. Let's see. Learned so far. I don't understand that either. If you have a solid way of learning C#, please tell me. Well, just making stuff. Making stuff is the best way to learn. That's how I do it. You could try out some other languages, see if that helps. So like Python's good for me. You could... C# is great because it teaches you about data types and all kinds of stuff. Just making cool stuff is the best way to learn, honestly. And read documentation. That's good too. Eventually your brain will be rewritten into this absolute mush, and then you'll never be able to look at problems the same again. And you'll just be like, hey, that doesn't make any sense, Jim. Why did I do that? It just takes time. So make cool stuff. That's how you learn. For example, I made this absolutely horrendous mail program a long time ago, and then looked back on it and realized how absolutely garbage it was, but it was my first C# project. I learned a lot of cool stuff. Dictionaries, sorting, you know, data types, and then it just kind of keeps going. I don't think hardcore note-taking is a very good way to learn. It's mostly just, yeah, you make cool thing go burr, you learn. It's kind of like, here, let me get a little graphical here. So it gets really hard, and then you're like, man, this is really boring. And then it gets a little easier, and then it gets fun, and then you kind of plateau out for a little while. You get a project idea, and you're like, oh man, that's awesome. And so the learning curve isn't just a straight line. It's like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, this is boring, to, hey, whoa, I can do some cool stuff now, to, shucks, what am I gonna do? I feel like I know everything, and then bam, you're hit with like some random library that you want to learn or something, you know. It's just, you could always learn more. There's like reflection, there's a lot of stuff you could do. Me personally, my favorite project was making a programming language. That taught me a lot about how programming languages work, how data is stored, the difference between hard copies and shallow copies, which that's just an object-oriented thing, don't worry about it. But yeah, just make cool stuff, man. I believe in you. Yeah, if you could just send me whatever questions you have, that'd be dope. Other than that, I think that about checks it.